All right, good evening. Welcome to the Tuesday, February 7th, 2023 City Commission work session. Would you do the roll call, please?
Commissioner Adam Marl.
Here.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell. Frank, are you on mute?
No, I'm not. Mike, can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you now. Okay. Commissioner Mike Mitchell.
Here.
Commissioner Rocky Smith.
Here.
And Mayor Denise McGriff.
Present. All right, so this is our work session agenda, and let's go to the first item, which is future agenda items. Mr. Conkle. Did we lose Tony somewhere?
Yeah, he's not on here.
I don't see him on here.
Okay, well, we all have them. So as he would say, good evening, commissioners and mayor. We have on our report here, we have the background, we have on February 23rd, we are going to do a budget 101 with Mr. Zook leading the pack. And then we have our goal setting session on March 3rd and March 4th, and everybody, I believe, is going to be in attendance on that. Then we have the upcoming work session on March 7th, where we have our joint meeting with the Planning Commission, review of the community survey, city setting speed limit discussion, street design standards are coming back, and loader road discussion. Does there anybody have anything else that obviously we don't want to add to this list, but if we do, we can add that to our list and get those scheduled as needed.
And Tony just hopped on. Tony, Denise just gave us the list of
I just gave you a report. So, yes, Mr. O'Donnell.
I just might say that as my intention for tonight is to ask that we set over the discussion.
If you hold off on that, we'll get to that on the next item.
Okay, I just mentioned because I'd like to move it into the future agenda item.
I agree. So let's wait till we get there. Tony, did you have anything else you want to add that I gave your report? He's still on mute.
So, sorry, I was finishing up a call with Mike there.
That's okay.
I'm sure it was absolutely wonderful. I missed it. So I guess if there are any questions, sorry.
All right. So let's move on from there. We have under discussion items, it's come to my attention that we would like to, there's two of us that would like to postpone item number 3. And before we get into our presentation from Nate Kaplan, I'd like to just go ahead and dispense with that. Mr. O'Donnell would like to put that item on a work session agenda. Am I correct, Mr. O'Donnell?
That is correct. Thank you.
Is there anybody that would object to that?
I don't have my agenda right in front of me at the moment. What item are we talking
Oh,
about?
memorandum of understanding, sports field fees and neighborhood associations, item number 3 under discussion items. I will basically just speak to it for a moment. I really feel that it's important for us to have some discussion before we bring this forward to the next work session where we have public involved. I'm supportive of us engaging with the public, but I really feel strong that we need to have a discussion amongst ourselves first so that we have a grounding and basis for where we need to go with this. And we haven't been able to really have that discussion as of yet. And there are so many facets to this that I feel that just jumping into it without sort of breaking it out where we can deal with it with each section, because not everything's the same on here. I'm hoping that that is okay with you all, that we do postpone this. And I'm sorry for anybody that's online right now that came, that wanted to come and talk to us about it. I see Cheryl on there, but I really think that we deserve to have a further conversation about it. Mike.
I agree 100%.
Okay. We have a consensus to move this, and then we can work with Tony to schedule. Okay. So we're going to dispense with item number 3 and put that on a future work session as soon as we can, given our other workload items. And I'm again apologize to anybody that logged on just for general comment, we do have the discretion at work sessions whether we're going to take public testimony or not, because it's not a hearing. It's not a, it's not an advertised public hearing where there's procedures and stuff. So we've been very informal about that. All right, so I understand we have Nate. Are you here? Here you are. Hi, welcome. We have a presentation regarding GoRail.
Thanks for having me, Mayor and Commissioners, everybody. I appreciate the time. My name is Nate Kaplan with GoRail. I'm actually in town right now. I'm the state director for Oregon, Washington, California, Nevada, and Colorado. And so what we were set up and designed to do about 25 years ago is to be in communities that are rail served or rail adjacent, and be sort of a liaison or conduit between the freight railroad industry and cities and counties and DOTs all across the country. So this is actually the first in-person, we call it site visit, we've done since the pandemic. So it's been interesting, nice to be back in Oregon after a few years. So we were created and set up by what they call the 7 Class 1 railroads, which are the biggest interstate freight haulers. And in your neck of the woods, it's Union Pacific and BNSF. And so I understand in Oregon City, there's, quite a bit of active freight rail. And if there's ever issues that pop up, then you're not sure who to talk to or who to deal with. We're designed to help kind of cut through the red tape and make sure that that your issues are getting heard and getting an answer in a reasonable amount of time of what's going on. It's kind of like how you folks are for your constituents. It's kind of like what we're set up and designed to do for commissioners and economic development groups and chambers of commerce. And so I'll throw it out there right now. So that's I'm just curious if the city has ever had much interaction with the railroads in the area. And if so, if it's been positive or negative, and then I'll get into some other stuff after.
Tony, why don't you go ahead and answer that? We've dealt with the railroad a lot over the years.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just see if John Lewis, so a lot of our interaction has been through ODOT Rail. I know our Public Works Department has worked with, I'm just not exactly sure which railroad provider. We had some pretty significant bridge construction that has happened on one of the viaducts in town recently. John, you might know a little bit more about the context and the work that you've had.
Well, yeah, we're a partner to the degree we can be a partner with the railroad. They've got the Amtrak station in town here as well, so we communicate with them probably not as often as we should, so that that relationship could be better, I think. But yeah, a lot of freight goes through town here, so we've or I guess I should say a lot of rail between Amtrak and the rail providers.
Could you talk to him a little bit about our Quiet Zone project?
Ooh, love quiet zones.
Yeah, so we've been pursuing a quiet zone, and we've been funded for a quiet zone. We're waiting for the state. The state's going to deliver that project. And at the end of the day, they deliver it because it's federal funded project. But we've got 2 crossings. One's a vehicle and pedestrian crossing. The other one's a pedestrian only crossing. And the idea would we'd get that built as soon as we could. So I don't know if you've got any pull with the ODOT staff who manage those funds, but we'd love to talk to you more about that if you could help with that. But yeah, it's a good project. It's Oregon City's got some topography challenges, and 10th and Railroad there is one of the more difficult crossings. So we'd like to make that safer for our community. And at the end of the day, we would like it to be a little quieter in our downtown so that we could have a little more residential development in the downtown area.
Well, that's great to hear. In quiet zones, it's good that you're pursuing that, because that can be a very lengthy process, and I'm sure you've been dealing with the Federal Railroad Administration. The FRA has a lot of hurdles you got to jump through and prerequisites, because it all comes down to safety, because they want to prevent any sort of injury or death from a pedestrian or a vehicle. So that's why they get those big loud blasting horns. One thing I'll get into, I'll probably jump into it. I'll talk about it now since you bring it up. But one of the big points that we've been asked and charged to get to communities that have railroad crossings, especially ones that are problematic, is the recently passed bipartisan infrastructure law dedicated $6 billion towards railroad crossing improvements and what they call at-grade elimination program. It's not very well publicized, so that's why we've been asked to make sure that local and county and state officials are aware that these funds are. So $6 billion was carved out to be spent over 5 years by communities that have an interest in doing anything from as low as like a $50,000 grant to hire a consultant to do an environmental review or scoping report to shovel-ready projects that are requiring over $100 million. All of that is being considered, and already the first year money was doled out last October, and the next round will be happening late spring, early summer. So if you have issues like that, we're also here to help. We boiled down the information and made it very easy to digest to see what cities would qualify and put together a checklist to see if it's worth pursuing, because that money can go a long way. And there hasn't been that sort of funding since, FDR. So when it comes to railroads, and so everybody's very excited to make sure that this money gets spent, because all across the country, there's, railroad crossings that are causing problems. And so it's a matter of kind of a first come, first serve and a competitive bidding process or application process between cities to get this pot of money every year for the next, 4 more years now. So I wanted to make sure that was on everybody's radar.
Hey, what types of projects would be funded under that?
So it would be, anything from a bridge where either vehicles would travel over, or a pedestrian bridge where only pedestrians would, or a combination tunnels that would go under grade, below grade, or even if what calls for gates, the traditional railroad crossing gates. But the FRA really wants to target, grade separation. So I'm by no means an engineer. That's where, a whole nother shtick. And so, but if you have folks on your staff that have already been looking at that, or if you need a consultant to hire, the federal government is pushing money out to do that kind of stuff. So that's the gist of it, mostly like bridges or tunnels, Mayor. And I have this, we have a lot of information sort of from last year, because the new batch of funding doesn't get released until late spring, early summer this year. But we expect it to be very similar to the program and how it was run last year. I will show you too. I'm going to try to screen share here. Oh boy.
So while you're doing that, we did have 4 at-grade crossings over the time that I've lived here, and we've closed 2 of those. One at 11th and Main, 11th and Main, and we had one at 17th Street, and those have both been closed because they were deemed unnecessary and rather unsafe.
I see.
Two major ones that I don't see those getting closed. So at least the one major one, I don't see those being closed at all.
Hey Nate, what was the name of that program again? I didn't know.
It's called the at-grade railroad crossing elimination program, which was part of the IIJA, or the bipartisan infrastructure law. It's got a few different names. I'm telling me I have to change my preferences right now.
Again, I apologize for not having you here in person after we did all that correspondence with each other.
No, it's okay. I'm sorry. It's not for some reason letting me allow Zoom. It's having a hard time letting me pull up. Is there any chance? I know I emailed a couple of documents over last week. It's not letting me screen share for some reason right now.
Yeah, I can pull those up for you here.
Okay, thank you.
I wish some of the money could be used to help upgrade our rail station.
There is other pots of funding which are also in this document for that we're not so much. Okay, yeah, we can start with this one, but there is funding in this document that there's stuff called CRISI grants and other sort of infrastructure related grants that are transportation related. So if there are particular projects that you're eyeing, even though we're not really working on it, we can get more information. So Mayor, if you, we'll get to another chart in a minute. And if something like that looks like it, okay, great. Yeah, here we go. Rail funding issue brief. So here, you can see some background and information on the funding I was talking about before, $5.5 billion over 5 years. We got 4 years left. A lot of this is that, like I said, we've been asked for some, we've been asked to really focus on the grade crossing elimination program. But that's not to say there isn't passenger rail funding also available. And if you scroll down, please, you'll see how much money was actually dedicated to passenger rail, and it was a lot more than freight stuff. And there's intercity rail, so you can see intercity passenger rail has over about $42 billion coming its way. So I got a feeling there's something there for what you're looking for, Mayor. And not to mention, you also have a new Congress member who sits on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. And so part of our goal too is to help educate new members of Congress, especially who sit on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, and make sure that they're aware of the importance of rail, both passenger and freight, in their district, and to answer any questions and kind of help make this stuff understandable. So yeah, I would say definitely take a hard look at this sheet. We're expecting it to look very similar. This is we published this last year, but it's going to be pretty similar this year. And so this can give folks a head start. We've been asked to kind of help distribute this information to make sure that folks in cities all across America can start preparing for the 2023 application program that's coming up. Cool. So that's money. That's always a fun thing to talk about that we haven't been able to do for a long time, being able to talk about money that the federal government wants to spend. And now if we'll do a quick look too at that first Oregon state specific, state fact sheet. This is just a cool kind of background FYI information. There's 22 railroads that operate in Oregon. We have a lot of short line railroads, which are, some are mom and pop, running very short distances. And then you've got the 2 class 1s, which is Union Pacific and BNSF. And that kind of gives you a good little the graph under the rail traffic. It is all the exports that go out by freight rail, and Oregon by far has the largest percentage of lumber and wood products compared to any other state in the U.S. And to kind of give you an idea of how important trains are in the state alone, it's hard to kind of wrap your head around the millions of tons of freight that gets moved, hundreds of millions. Well, what does that really mean? If you were to stop trains in Oregon for 1 year, you'd have to add 630,000 additional truck trips to move that same amount of freight out of the state, which you can imagine would be a lot of traffic and a lot of headaches, and not to mention more extra pollution. And then if you scroll down, please, you'll see a map of the current lines that are active in the state, almost 3,000 miles of or almost 2,500 miles of active rail lines, actual steel in the ground.
Go back, Angelique. Go back up on this sheet. There you go.
Yeah, there you go. So I was in Albany earlier today, in Lebanon, and they have a couple of short lines there. They're very active in the area, and huge spurs of economic development. I'm sure you're aware there's a new intermodal facility that was built about $40 million outside of right in Albany, or right outside there. And so economic development, it kind of comes hand in hand with railroads because of all the extra stuff that you could now do was not capable before, whether it's manufacturing or just getting products to distant markets. Yeah, and then so that's, I always love to hand that out to folks because it just gives you a good idea of what each state looks like. And we have this sort of data for every state, if you're ever interested. And then I guess we get to the last sheet too, totally kind of shifting. We are also asked to get information out about the Ask Rail app, which is this free app that's been around for a while that the industry offers for public safety officials. Mostly fire chiefs and police chiefs and sheriffs use this. And what it does is it gives them and their employees and their first responders access to high security level information about what is being moved on a train in the event of a derailment, which is very rare, but it happens, unfortunately. But unfortunately, it happens less in America than any other country in the world. So this Ask Rail app is, you have to get a security clearance to use it, but we certainly encourage every fire chief and sheriff and police chief to have it. So if there was to be a derailment in your city, whoever gets there first can type the code into the app. There's a code on the back of every tank car and rail car, and it'll tell that individual exactly what's in it and what's in front of it and what's behind it and who owns it, which railroad and what shipper owns it, so they can safely get to and respond to the issue, appropriately. So that's kind of a no-brainer. And it's, again, this is the type of stuff, information that like the FBI has access to seeing whoever logs on to this because it's very secure. If that information ever got into the wrong hands, could be devastating. So, but something that your public safety leaders should definitely be aware of and hopefully train the rest of their staff to have that, especially if there is so much freight going through town. It's just good to have in case. And there was just a horrible situation in Ohio, I'm sure you may have heard of in the news this past weekend. They're still dealing with that. So in those sort of situations, you'd want to make sure you'd have this app to save time, depending on whatever's happening. So I will leave it at that for now. One of our big things is at this point too, focusing on the new members of Congress. Like I said, we have a new one in your district, and making sure that she's aware and understands that the importance and the role that railroads play in the community, and then at every level, just we're here to be a resource for you and your city and your constituents. If you ever have any kind of question, whether it's about getting hooked up to the rail lines or a homeless encampment that is causing a problem or whatever, we can help find a solution. We're always available for you. And I'm the point of contact for Oregon, so always feel free to reach out to me directly.
Any questions, gentlemen? Go ahead.
Just one question for Nate on the Ask Rail component. Do you have to take the numbers off the individual car, or can you just somehow identify the train in its entirety and they'll say on this particular load you have 4 cars that pose a danger?
I'm pretty sure you have to enter the actual in the tank or the car that's having a problem. Yeah, I don't think it tells you by train movement. No, because sometimes probably the reason for that is things switch off so often. Sometimes they might have to drop a car and put it on a subsequent train that's coming a couple hours later to move it. So it's not always predetermined. How a train is not going to look the same in Oregon as it looks like at its final destination in Chicago. You know, it gets shuffled up.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Any other questions? So Captain Davis, were you aware of that app?
Good evening. No, we are. So that I'm aware of. So I'm going to look into it and get us signed up.
Very good. Good to hear.
Fantastic. All right. Well, so much. And I hope that we get to see you next time in person.
You bet. And I'd say take a hard look at that grant money. And if there's anything there, you think that if there's projects in town that could use that sort of assistance, let me know and we can help connect you to the right people, whatever the case is.
All right. Thank you so very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. So we are on to item number 2. Presentation on code enforcement complaint process. Is that you, Captain Davis and Mr. Kersey?
Yes, Mayor. Mayor, Commission. We'll need Ryan to be the presenter, but good evening. Thanks for having us. As you're aware, a couple of months ago, you asked to see a presentation on our code enforcement complaint process. So tonight we're here to discuss some of our staffing, how it compares to other cities, workload, goals, and the complaint process from start to finish all the way through the court process. And then we'll open up to any questions if you have. So I'll turn it over to Ryan Kersey, our code enforcement manager, so we can start the presentation.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. Thanks for having us back. And I'm not sure if this is preloaded on here or I'm able to share this.
Ryan, you should be able to share. You're a co-host.
Okay.
You can't?
Let me see here. It will not allow me to share.
You're not.
Having all those problems here.
Yeah, I can pull it up for you.
Okay.
I'm also able to share. It looks like I can too.
You can as well?
Looks like it's allowing me to.
Oh. Would it be better if Captain Davis shared his screen for the presentation?
Looks like Chief Band is shaking his head. Somehow, yes or no?
There you go.
All right. Can everyone see that?
All right. So this is just a brief overview of our current staffing levels. We kind of break it down by the actual job position. So up until January, we had 1.5 code enforcement officers. And with your guys' approval, in addition, we have another person in training. So we're technically up to 2.5 full-time employees in code compliance. We still have 1.5 FTE for parking enforcement, one person in the office, and then of course myself. So that's a brief overview of what we have right now. And then if you compare it to some of the, more proactive agencies in the metro area, then we included Bend as well, just because the model that they use is pretty proactive and something that we have been looking at. Happy Valley has, 3 officers in the field. They have 1 admin person. They do not have a downtown or parking area, so they have no staff for that. Like Oswego utilizes the CSO position, which is the community service officer, part of their police department. They have some police functions as well as going through and doing some of the city's municipal code enforcement and animal control. And then over in Bend, they have obviously a lot of the population there is, more than double of what we have in the surrounding cities with us. They have 5 on their code enforcement team. They contract out for parking. They have 3 people for that. They have 1.5 admin people in their office, and they have 12 CSOs through their police department. So, and that's a huge thing and something we can talk about later, just how they operate that part of their program. But that's not how we're currently functioning with code enforcement here. And so I wanted to break down the cases over the last few years and the total numbers from 2018. Obviously, you can see them on the screen there. They kind of rose up through the years of the pandemic. A lot more complaints came in, and then this last year, they tapered off just a little bit. That also has to do with a little bit of staffing. And then in 2022, our top 3 cases, 47% was the parking and abandoned vehicles that were reported to us. Then we had solid waste, 18%, and vegetation was 12% of that. So what's the overall goal? The overall goal for code enforcement here in Oregon City is to enhance the neighborhood livability, educate residents to resolve violations through our voluntary compliance. If voluntary compliance does break down, then we'll move to a more formal enforcement case and follow the outlined procedures. So right now we're operating off a complaint-driven process and doing some proactive inspections through those. Currently, most of the violations come in through citizen complaints. We receive them on the phone, through the Oregon City request online, and then also in person. Code staff, we're going out to address a complaint. You know, we will take note of any gross violations at nearby properties, but we don't go check the entire neighborhood or scan through for any proactive response. Just, you know, with the staff we have currently, that's about what we can handle. With the addition of the staff that we just added, we're going to be more proactive on addressing the larger code violations, especially in relation to the vacant properties in the city, and then also doing some more enforcements and kind of keep vehicles moving on the Bluff and the North Main Street areas for parking time frame compliance. So when a call comes in, obviously we just talked about in-person, phone, or email, the My Oregon City request, or we sometimes receive some from other departments. We review each one to determine what violations there may be, if any departments that needs to be assigned to outside of us prior to our enforcement. And then basically we input that information to our InterGov, soon to be 311 program, and we assign it to our staff for our initial site inspection. The first inspection will be conducted within 24 hours on most business days.
Hey, Ryan.
Yeah.
Could you on that last slide just sort of explain what it means to determine the department that it should be assigned to? Talk about a couple of those cases and when we would send something to another department.
Oh, of course. Yeah. So when we get complaints that come in, sometimes it may be something of, you know, they need to get a tree permit for those kind of things, or they need to, you know, look at a sidewalk that they want to get repaired. So some of those things have to go through the public right-of-way process to obtaining a permit, getting the appropriate inspections done out of their property. So we would assign those out to, you know, public works or engineering, or sometimes planning, get involved. We have trees that come down, just so that way everything is documented properly and permitted properly. So when we go out to do a site inspection, our biggest thing is looking at a compliance timeline for what violations out there. So we're going to go out there, we're going to determine if the reported violations do actually exist. We're going to attempt to contact anybody at the property and kind of educate and go over the violation to set up a timeline for them to bring that into compliance. We always take photos during our visit. We make sure to take them from the right of way to document any conditions out there. If nobody is home, obviously people are at work, could be on vacation, those sort of things. We do send a letter out to the property owner, and we talk about what violations are on the property. We talk to them about also setting up a timeline for compliance. We also do have kind of a time frame based on what violation it is, somewhere between 10 and 30 days. We will continue to work with all the property owners to obtain compliance. We may adjust those timelines if they do make progress. Some of the more major violations we've found with properties that have, you know, debris, solid waste, junk vehicles, it takes a while for those to be removed. We understand it can't all be done within, you know, 2 weeks to a month. So what we want to look for is some sort of progress. So if they're working with us and they're getting the most, you know, I guess, wouldn't say, you know, just getting the big violations out of the way and then start to work on the other ones, then, you know, we'll continue to work with them and set out different compliance dates, you know, usually about 30 days if we do see compliance. So if there is a communication breakdown or no communication at all, then basically we'll do a reinspection to see if any progress was made on our initial compliance date. We'll note the current conditions. They'll be documented by photos, and of course, all the written case notes are entered into the system. Then we'll make a determination if we need to issue a second letter, which is our notice of violation, or if we'll issue a citation and send it to our municipal court to be reviewed by the judge. You know, if they do get those things corrected, we will close the case out with compliance. So heading over to municipal court, the process there, if we do issue a citation, the property owner has the initial appearance for either entering a plea of no contest or not guilty. For a no contest plea, our staff will present the facts to the court, along with what we would like to see as a sentencing packet. Generally, our biggest goal is compliance with the property. So we're not looking for large amounts of money. We want them to put that into the property, get it clean, and then be on some sort of a compliance program. We can usually generally ask for 12 to 24 months of kind of monitored compliance of the property and inspections by us, and the court will usually grant those just to work with the property owner further. We obviously want to make an assessment and ask for fair and reasonable fines and or dismissal at the end of that compliance time. For a not guilty plea, the court will obviously set up a trial date for the case to be presented by the code enforcement and the property owner before the municipal judge. So our desired municipal court outcomes, our goal in the court trial is to openly present the facts and to work with the court and property owner resolution to bring the property into compliance. Some cases do not gain compliance. It could go to an abatement process, which we would then have to go through and apply for a warrant to obtain a bid, and then go back on the property with another warrant to clean the property, all at the expense of the city. We would then go through and lien the property when that is cleaned up and completed. We always continue to work with the property owners, even through a trial, just to bring the property into compliance. So if it does go to a trial and they want to, get some more time, maybe they clean some stuff up, the judge can, obviously order those things, and we would ask for just a compliance timeline even to be granted that. So this is a recent case that we've had. It just got completed here within the last month. This is up off in Division near the hospital. Just a situation where it was a property rental and, the tenants were not clean. There was a lot of junk vehicles, other things like that, solid waste, some kitchen food debris. So our staff worked with the property owner. Property owner spent a lot of time and money to get things completed. The tenants had to be moved out so they could get things cleaned up and complied with. So good success case. And that takes us to our questions.
All right, commissioners, questions? I can't see anybody because we're still on the sharing screen space. Mr. O'Donnell.
Can we stop sharing this? There we go.
Yeah, there we go.
Thank you.
I think the questions about code enforcement have always been the same. There's been a concern that in matters of solid waste and vegetation, that they've been strictly complaint-based. And in the realm of parking and noise complaints, the question has always been coverage, specifically nights and weekends. Where do we stand on those two items? Do you see us moving towards a code enforcement officer seeing a solid waste or vegetation complaint and taking unilateral action without a complaint? And what do you see in the ability of our staffing to provide in the realm of parking and noise, night and weekend coverage?
Yes, so to address the first question, thank you, Commissioner O'Donnell. One of the things we look at is kind of that, how we want to see neighborhood livability. So if we're going and looking at a certain property, we do see some growth violations of the property. Currently our staff will stop, document, try to make contact with the property and open up a new case. We don't have the current ability with staffing to stop at every house. I think that also opens up another set of, things to worry about, stopping at every house in the neighborhood if there are violations. And kind of ranking where we would place those violations. You know, at what point, you know, would we be proactive, you know, over tall grass? Is it 2 inches over, half a foot over the regulation? Fire hazards, those kind of things. I know site visibility is one that we would stop and take care of, you know, without a complaint, just because those are safety items for us. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, given the number of solid waste and vegetation complaints, what do you feel historically has been the number that have not been complaint-based, that have been initiated by a code enforcement officer on their own, percentage-wise?
Yeah, just looking at the last 18 months that I've been here, I would say it's probably 10%. The majority of everything that comes in is complaint-driven.
I'll let you continue with the answers on parking, noise, and weekend and night coverage.
Okay.
Let me just cut in real quick. So one thing, we talked about this several times, and I think sort of outside of being out in the street and seeing what our staff are doing, it comes off maybe worse than it is. I don't think that if, you know, our staff people, one of the complaints we always get is it takes too long. So if our staff in the morning and they've got 10 contacts they've got to go make that day, they're trying to get those resolved as fast as they can. So if they got a list of 10 things they're going out to do, their goal is getting their 10 things done to deal with what's at hand. If they stopped at everything they saw while they're trying to get things done as fast as possible, does that make sense? So it's not, they just don't care about those things. And there are obvious things that come up, but it's more trying to get the stuff in front of them done. Does that make sense?
Well, Chief, I don't think anybody's asking to stop at everyone. I think what we're asking for is an exercise of judgment. When you see something completely grotesque that needs to be dealt with, I realize the process itself has its own handicaps. I've witnessed dried weeds 30 inches tall that the process does not deal with in a timely manner, but that's the process. I recognize the limitations of staffing, but I also would like to see, if you see a gross situation in a neighborhood, to exercise initiative and move on it. And I'm not saying you have to correct everything you see. It's just it's that very judgment that people get paid for.
I think, Commissioner O'Donnell, what you're talking about is what I was going to use as an example. There is a piece of property on Malala Avenue that is a vacant lot, and every year the grass starts up. It's a very well-traveled thoroughfare, and knowing that we've had to go and talk to these people every year, to me, that would be proactive to say, by the way, you know, the property's starting to get, the weeds are starting to come up, or the grass is starting to come up. Cause I mean, it got so bad last year, they could have baled it. That's how tall it got. And I know that they see it because you know, it's just keeps getting, you know, taller and taller. It's down now. There's a track hose. You know what? I'm not going to say the address or whatever because the house burned down, but there's a track hose sitting on it right now. And I look at it whenever I go by. I think, well, how's the grass doing? It's not there yet, but it's been ongoing for a number of years, even when the house was still there. I think that's what you're talking about. Something like that that's pretty darn obvious. We've contacted these people before, you know.
I'm talking about that. And I'm talking about when the situation, such as 30 inch high dried grass, represents a hazard, a fire hazard, a danger to health and safety, there should be a way to expedite that process and get it remedied.
Rocky or Mike or Adam, any questions or suggestions? Go ahead, Adam.
Thank you. And thank you, Ryan, for the presentation. I was just wondering if you could give a quick status update on the abandoned or vacant building program that we had recently approved, how that's going. I based off of the conversation we've just had, I'm curious how you would get compliance with a complaint-driven process on this, if that is the case that is being used for this program, or just how you guys are gaining compliance on this and making sure that people actually know about it.
Yeah, so one of the things we're doing is we're working with our IT department to add this to our website. So it can be kind of a one-stop. People that own a vacant property can register those. One of the things we find is a lot of property management companies will do those nationwide. So a lot of out-of-state, those kind of things. So what we've done is we've actually been proactive and just anything we can do to identify a vacant building or vacant structure, we've already started a list. We have about a dozen of them right now. We're going through each one. One of them, in fact, we contacted today, working with their attorney to basically work with the property owners, bring everything into compliance. And it's kind of, we're treating it like full circle. So we're addressing ordinance violations, we're addressing non-ordinance violations like graffiti, those kind of things that we don't have the enforcement tool right here to do with, but we have it in the vacant property registration code. So that's great to go through with that. And then also looking at it from the side of how do we prevent trespassing, people breaking into the structure while it's vacant. So making sure our police have the tools as well, especially in the evening hours, overnight hours, so they have the tools to make those, contact enforcement be on the property. So those are all things that we've incorporated right now. We do have 12 properties identified, and we've been working on those right now. And that's kind of a mix of ones that we've got through complaints and ones that we've gone out and identified.
Good, thank you.
Frank, did you have something else? Your hand.
Yeah, I wanted to double back on the night and weekend coverage on matters of parking and noise complaints. Where are we at on that?
I think one of the things we're looking for, and I think maybe Captain Davis or Chief Band can add to it, but one of the things was the parking study that you guys heard from at one of the last meetings from Rick Williams and his staff, and setting some goals on looking at, do we look at night and weekend coverage and those kind of things, and where that prioritizes. With our current staffing, we probably wouldn't be able to cover much more than some adjusted hours in the evening without being able to look at, additions for people working later hours or on the weekends.
I think that's a discussion that we're coming into the budget cycle. I think we need to understand what we need to provide that kind of coverage. Parking, we've often heard it said that everybody knows that come 5 o'clock on Friday night, it's a free for all because code enforcement isn't there. So, what do we need to do about that? We know, and I know, having been a former police officer, the police department really, that's as low a priority call as they can have almost. Matters of public safety come first. This is not their favorite thing to do, and they'll do it as time allows. The matter of noise, I believe the police department has responded. I don't know what we have in the way of, does anyone have decibel meters, either code enforcement or the police department?
I don't know.
No. So our noise ordinance, which was updated, I can't remember how many years ago it was. It was not that many though. It was 3-4 years ago, I think. The commission at the time, maybe it was longer than that. We discussed whether or not we go down the decibel meter route, and we chose not to. So there's nothing about being within a certain decibel reading for whether or not something is a noise issue. We don't get a ton of noise complaints. Every once in a while, something, I know there was recently one at a commission meeting. We don't get a ton of them that we can't resolve. I think there's problems with decibel meters for what the instrument is, how you read it, where you read it from, and those sorts of things. Yeah.
Well, Chief, as much as I admire you, we disagree on that. Decibel meters, electronic device, it can be calibrated, it can take a reading. You know that I went through that here, and I was very sympathetic to the gentleman that came before us at the commission meeting. And actually, the noise ordinance is stronger than that gentleman believes it is. If he can't conduct a normal conversation, then that's a violation. But there's nothing better than an objective measurement that says at 200 feet away, this is a decibel reading, or inside an adjoining house, this is the decibel reading. So maybe that's something we revisit. I'm more concerned. I think those are infrequent, and unfortunately, when you get them, like the gentleman said, that usually those people are fairly unreasonable. And as you know, I have my own experience. The parking and coverage, night and weekend coverage, I really think that's a discussion we need to have. Is there value in that and freeing up our officers and in getting visible coverage? And again, we're coming into the budget cycle. Maybe I think that'd be an opportune time to have that discussion. Thanks.
Commissioner O'Donnell, I think part of the problem with the parking enforcement on the weekends is we have got to inform and make our business owners understand that on the weekend, that does not mean all your employees can park on the street because it's taking up space for the customers, which is a problem.
Yeah, and
I'm
we're
not
all
sure
well
that,
aware
you
of
know,
that.
like you said, we may be ready for the discussion, but one of the recommendations is that we have parking enforcement on the weekends. And I'm not comfortable with that. But I think we need to have further discussion about it. I guess my question has to do with one of the places where we seem to have a bogged down has to do with community development. And I understand that they were in the process of transferring some of the responsibilities or some enforcement issues to code. And I hope that that has happened because they don't really have the bandwidth to do it. And part of the problem is that when there's been complaints that involve that, that's where it bogs down and we don't seem to get any forward movement. So has that happened? I was told this was in the process last fall.
Yeah, we've been taking some, first step actions on a lot of the sign complaints and things that have come into the city here, kind of taking it out of their hopper and us making contact face to face with property owners, with, the businesses, just bringing them into the regulations. And then ones that would be allowed to be permitted, we send them over there with a short time frame to get the proper permits and get them put up properly.
I know that when we send out, when new businesses come in and they get their business license, I know there's information sent out, but I can tell you that the last 3 months, every new business that's come into town, they start putting up those flippy flags. And, I know that they got the brochure because I was told that goes out in the business license application, but, it's one of those things where, we could be a little proactive when they have time. If they see it, it's like stop in and say, hey, welcome to Oregon City, but you can't have that. Or did you think about another option for signage that doesn't involve, a code violation or I don't know. So like I said, I'm hoping that transfer took place because again, that's where we seem to have the bottlenecks. The other thing that you talked about a little bit was, so I was trying to get clarification on your sheet with the code and parking cases. So you have parking and abandoned vehicles, and that was 770. So are the parking things beyond? That's not violation of parking meter zones. Is that something else? What is that?
Yeah, those are complaints that come in that are strictly assigned to our code enforcement officers. They're not part of the normal, parking, observations and checking meters and things downtown. It's outside of that.
Is that like a car got put in front of my driveway for over 48 hours?
Yeah, I mean, they stem from that to, hey, this car's been out here a month, or, car got dropped off, now there's no wheels on it. It kind of includes all those bases.
A car got dropped off and there's no wheels on it?
Motorhomes, campers, things like that.
Okay.
Get a lot of those.
Okay, I'm just trying to imagine somebody dropping off a vehicle with no wheels on it and just leaving it out in the street. So sorry, it just kind of made me laugh a little bit. Yeah, I think too, one of the things that, I tell people, I think it's the name too. For me, it's like I tell people, we'll call code compliance. Compliance has a softer tone to me than enforcement. And I know that's the name of it, but when I tell people, yeah, call code enforcement, call code compliance, and see if we can get somebody to comply. But yeah, I think I think you guys are doing, what you can with the staff that we have. But again, my concern is that with all the workload, there's still an ability, and I agree with Commissioner O'Donnell, that there's a way that we can be proactive. sometimes just a friendly discussion with somebody, and we can head something off at the pass. Mr. Mitchell.
Yeah, just a question for Ryan. With the additional officer that we just added, how far is that going to get us toward proactive as opposed to reactive? Is it really going to be enough to really change the way you do business?
I think really, half of their time is going to be spent on the vacant property project, and that's fully, proactive. We've got a few that have been identified, but the majority of them have come from just us going out and finding them, or coming across them through other, agencies, departments, those kind of things. And so the new staff member is going to be helping a lot with that. And then I think when we hit vegetation season, we'll be able to, it's easy to start the case. The hardest part, like Commissioner O'Donnell pointed out, is, getting that compliance factor, the timeline. Because even if we try to work with the property owner for a couple weeks, and they don't want to do anything, then we're going to court. That's another 2 weeks to a month, and if we don't do anything and we deem we need to go and abate the property, that's probably another, 2 weeks to a month to get the, warrant, to get a contractor to go out, to clean the property. So we have done them every year, it looks like, for the most part, for the last 5 years or so that I've looked back on. We've cleaned a few properties, that have had those large violations of vegetation. So we'll continue that for sure.
A lot of these cases are super lengthy. If someone doesn't want to do it voluntary, I just broke down some of the numbers for 22 is with 3 of the officers and Ryan not taking any case, there's 535 complaints per employee that they're doing, just that are complaint driven. And then with adding it, we're going to reduce that by about 125 or so. So I think our goal is, and where we're getting to, is we're getting more proactive and being able to do more. Could we do more? I think if we had more bodies, we definitely could do more. So we're analyzing that. We're trying to understand. We got a lot of new people in code enforcement, and so that's our goal.
What about Mr. O'Donnell's concern about, so my neighborhood seems to have a particular bent on tree removal on the weekends, and people they're frustrated because they don't know who to call.
Well, I think the easiest thing for us is if they do call non-emergency, just to get it documented. They can have an officer go out, if they're available, police officer stop by, document at least who's there, and they can forward that information over to us so we can pick up Monday and start with it.
Okay, that's good advice. Mr. O'Donnell.
First thing I do want to say is my past experience, and I'll say this to Ryan and Chief Jim Band and Sean Davis, my past experience with either the code enforcement personnel or the police department has been outstanding. I can't compliment any of them for that. Unfortunately, some of those key people in code enforcement have moved on, and they were great employees, the ones that I had interacted with. There's a disconnect, and I want to make you 3 folks aware of it. And that happened because a neighbor of mine called on a parking problem. He called dispatch, which I believe is handled by county or whatever during the weekend. County referred him to code enforcement. At code enforcement gets a message that we're closed on weekend, and the poor guy ends up in an endless loop. So that's not a good solution. And yes, we did request a police officer, understanding that that's a very low priority call, as it should be. But if we can do something, we need to educate those folks in dispatch that don't just send people to a dead end, because it doesn't bode well for our service levels to the community. It doesn't solve anything. So that's just information for you 3 gentlemen.
Oh, I appreciate that. It's interesting because dispatch does dispatch for multiple agencies. So sometimes they don't understand what each agency needs to do or wants, their priorities. So I'll definitely look into that.
Yeah, Sean, I just think it's education, staff education for dispatch. Thanks.
Yep.
Thanks for bringing that up, because I had somebody else have that happen to as well. Any other questions? Ms. Hurd-Ravage, you have any comment about my comments?
Sorry, it took me a minute to get online. I really appreciate Ryan's cooperation with planning and kind of helping us move some of the code enforcement over to code enforcement. We did have quite a backlog for a while, and we've got a process in place now where we send out compliance letters, and we've updated our letters to make sure that they're more user-friendly and make sense to people. And then we follow up with a second letter. And I'd say that recently the things that we are seeing are they're not the type of case that code enforcement can start with. So if someone is taking out trees in the natural resource overlay district, it's not exactly something that Ryan and his team can start with, because there's a land use case there. There's a land use process. So, but we've been working pretty closely with Ryan and his team since I got here. So I think we're making some good progress.
Thank you. I appreciate it, because we have a couple of citizens that have submitted long lists about sign code violations that they were getting extremely frustrated about because it wasn't moving.
That was one of the things I was going to point out specifically, that when we talked about, when you folks just gave us another staff person who's still in training and not even up and out running yet, was the sign code and us being more proactive in going out and hitting those signs. They do sweeps for signs, but that's something that we fully expect you're going to see more of with this person.
Any other questions? Anything you want to ask them to move forward on? Mr. O'Donnell.
I think you're on mute.
This is an invitation to either our code enforcement or law enforcement officers. If there's any policy changes that you would like to see the commission enact that would help them do their job, please feel free to come forward with them. We can't help what we don't know. So that's an invitation to you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Mr. Mitchell.
Yeah, in one of your early slides, you showed staffing from other cities, some of which are using what you call a community service officer. Can you maybe take a minute and tell how does that work? And is that something that we should be considering down the road?
Sure, I'll talk about that. So like Oswego, they use the code or the CSO model, which is a community service. So they kind of are partners with the police department, and they go out there. Sometimes they help with traffic control. Sometimes they help with any homeless issues. They're more visible driving around, being kind of like on a patrol. They still take complaints as they come in. They usually drive like a marked unit that says community service. And they take sometimes, I know like Oswego, they take low-level crime reports. So they're out there visiting with the public. They can go out there if someone maybe has some graffiti. They'll deal with the crime aspect, but then they'll also deal with working with the homeowner or business owner to get that cleaned up. So that's one thing we are exploring. Like Oswego, I know Albany, Bend, they have a pretty good system that we're kind of looking at and seeing if that's something we want to take on and model.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Hey, thank you so much for giving us this great update, and we'll look forward to seeing you all again and see how we're doing.
Great, thank you. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mr. Conkle, we are down to number 4, Oregon City Inflow and Infiltration Program Service Lateral Improvement Program. Wow, that's a mouthful.
Thank you. Yeah, John Lewis and his team will be presenting the information related to this topic.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. So I'm just going to share my screen real quick, and just a quick shout out to Ryan and Sean and Jim. They have been doing some great work for Public Works as well. So that question about community development or Public Works, the team that they have today is amazing. Best I've seen. So I really appreciate their work. Is my screen showing?
No, we just still see you.
It's weird.
John, I can share mine. Oh, it's working.
Yay.
All right, there we go. Okay, well, thank you for your time tonight. I'll try to get through these as quick as I can. I've got a team with me tonight. Rob Lee from Leeway Engineering is on. He's going to be my co-presenter. We're going to tag team a little bit here. I just wanted to acknowledge Kenny Kennedy Schultz, who's new to the Oregon City Public Works team. He's an engineer who's been working closely with Rob and a couple of folks that are on the call, David Brokaw and Jim Montgomery. They're both with Wallace Engineering. So if you look down at the bottom of the slide here, Wallace Engineering is the firm that we hired for our I&I program management. It's a multi-year, multi kind of phased consulting contract with them. Leeway is a sub-consultant, and we asked Rob to participate because he's really got a solid background on this. Some of you may remember Rob. He's spoken to you before, at least most of you, or some of you. So anyway, he'll be on in a little bit here. I'm going to take the first few slides though.
And you're going to tell us quickly what Kenneth is doing. Hi, Kenneth. Welcome.
Thank you.
So yeah, Kenny is he's an engineer in the Public Works Department. He's focused on wastewater engineering mostly. Right now, his focus is on the I&I program, but he's also got a wealth of knowledge. So we'll probably have him take on some stormwater projects, and who knows? We'll see. As you know, we're kind of a multifaceted team that is small. So sometimes we ask folks to do things that they're not necessarily had planned to do, but we'll ask them to do it. So let's see if I can get this to move forward. There we go. So real quick, for those, I know we've talked about Inflow and Infiltration in the past, but we're going to go ahead and do a little repeat there. We're going to talk about some city code. We really want to get to this question about lateral replacements and why we think that's important, and hopefully get some direction from the city commission on laterals. We're going to talk both about the lateral that's in the public right of way. Our main emphasis and reason for this work session is for the lateral that's on private property. We're going to give you our recommendation and kind of a theoretical timeline if we kind of get the right feedback that we're looking for. So what is I&I? I know you've seen this or seen a slide similar to this, but inflow is really rainwater, surface water that is directly getting into the sanitary sewer system. In Oregon City, we have a combined sewer, no, we don't. We used to have a combined sewer system. Now we have a separated sewer system. So there's stormwater that goes into its own collection system that's separate from the sanitary sewer system. And then we have a sanitary system. So when stormwater in the form of rain, ice, melted water, or melted ice gets into our sewer system, either through openings at the surface level or through damaged pipelines, sometimes rain drains are connected. That's problematic. And so when we see that happening, we have concerns about it. And really, I think, the most obvious place where that would be concerning would be at the bottom end of the system where our wastewater treatment plant is located. We have, in Oregon City, we've got a regional wastewater treatment plant down on, it's on Agnes Street, but it's down near the old 82nd, down near I-205 and Highway 213. That's where the regional wastewater treatment plant is at, that Water Environment Services operates. So that's kind of the obvious place. But in Oregon City, what we've seen is our downstream collection system, or the pipe network, downstream from where all this rainwater or surface water may be getting into, is inundating that pipe network, right? And most of our pipelines are designed to be what we call an open channel flow. So they're not designed to run full necessarily. They're not pressure pipes. They're intended to run pretty full, but oftentimes less than halfway full. Right in the summertime, there's really not a lot of flow in these pipelines. So when they have inundation like that, they really can fill up those pipes and create more damage. Imagine a pipeline that's got some cracks and things to it that's now under pressure because it's surcharged. So that water can actually exfiltrate, which becomes a problem and deteriorates that pipeline. So, and we've also seen scenarios where those pipelines are surcharged so much that they overflow. And some of you may remember our period of time where we were addressing some moratorium areas. It was a self-implied moratorium, but the regulators were watching as well, and they were happy to see the city take those projects on. But those are the kind of problems that we were dealing with. And while we did do pipe upgrades to some of those downstream pipe networks, it's very, very costly. And in some neighborhoods, it's really, just too difficult to do. So that's why that's a little more about I&I and why we think it's important. All right. So this is a map of Oregon City. It's got a lot of coverage. It's not a complete map of Oregon City, but we're showing some of the colored areas, which are some of our focus areas. They're some of our most I&I prone areas. And we've done some work in the Rivercrest area, a little bit of work in the Lynn neighborhood or area. These aren't neighborhood maps, by the way. They are drainage basin maps. So a little different, but some of them are, Rivercrest, for instance, is also a name of a neighborhood, but that's just how we've named the basins. But anyway, so these colored areas are also areas that we've determined have a high rate of infiltration and inflow. So they're the focus areas, and these colored areas are also some of the areas that Clackamas County's Water Environment Services has approved as basins where we would qualify for reimbursement in these basins. But in the areas outside, they wouldn't be qualified for that. So this is kind of our key focus area. Reasons why we were concerned about I&I, some of which I've mentioned, obviously capacity. In these areas, for instance, we have 3 different pump stations. And so pump stations that are downstream of an area that's got a lot of I&I in it are also very problematic for us because they either run a heck of a lot more than they should, or they get inundated and they can't handle all the flow. So pump stations can be a problem. And then I mentioned overflows and backups, some of the problems with structural integrity of pipes and the treatment plant. So those are all, really good reasons to address I&I and why we've been relatively aggressive with our program. I think the city's program is starting to get some momentum to it. We're learning a few things. We've been pretty focused on a couple of key basins, as I said, Lynn and Rivercrest. And, those were the basins with the highest I&I. So that made sense for us to start there. But we've been through a pretty aggressive TV program, been able to focus on the pipes that needed the most work. And so that's what we've done. In the Rivercrest Basin alone, we've been kind of treating that as our pilot project and learning a lot about how best to approach these neighborhoods, how to communicate well with the property owners. We've repaired over 14,000 lineal feet of leaky main lines in that Rivercrest Basin. So pretty aggressive program. It's generally been successful. We have learned some lessons as well. And